When I first delved into the world of hormones and hormone replacement therapy, I discovered today's guests and was amazed by the depth of their knowledge. When women ask me which course they should take to learn more about HRT, I always refer them to the wise and well women, Kristin Johnson and Maria Claps. They are also the authors of a new groundbreaking book on menopause, The Great Menopause Myth, which I highly recommend reading. As I have to say, it is a unique and very appreciated perspective on women's midlife health. Kristin and Maria share many of the same mentors as I do when it comes to hormone replacement therapy, and we see eye to eye on many aspects of women's health. Maria, an FDN practitioner, and Kristin, an NTP Board Certified in Holistic Nutrition, are plain-spoken friends and practitioners who share a passion for women's health, especially women's health at midlife. As both are themselves menopausal, they've refined the art and science of thriving as a midlife woman based on both clinical and personal experience. They combine individualized nutrition and lifestyle changes tailored to midlife women's needs with mindset coaching, lab testing, and hormone replacement therapy education to help women thrive so that they can stop or prevent their health from spinning out of control. You can find them at wiseandwell.me. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
I feel like it's so due time that I've had you guys on the that I've
we hang out.
having you on the podcast. Yes,
Thank
and that we've hung out because I have been huge fans of yours for so many years. And I do recommend so many people to go to your site, follow you guys on Instagram because you are constantly pumping out really good quality information, which I think is kind of hard to come by these days when it comes to hormones.
Thank you.
Which I'm so grateful for the book. Oh, I was just
Good.
telling before we started recording, I'm like, thankfully somebody's written a book now that is like with this information, like there's no book that I've read, and I've read all the hormone books, I feel like, that has your take and your perspectives on hormones. So good job, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So both of you, what got you into this space? Maybe Kristin, you could start first because I love your guys' story. Like you're like me, where it was like you had no choice. It was like God or whomever was like, oh, guess what you're gonna do? You're gonna go into this space because you're gonna have a really hard time with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, mine, I started out like a lot of nutritionists do, kind of doing general nutrition work and coaching people and just better lifestyle habits. I did the old like grocery store runs and cooking classes and all the stuff. And loved it, but it kept kind of ending up with women that were just like me, quote unquote, in terms of facing sort of middle age and wondering what was happening with their metabolism and all sorts of things. And I was also going through some things that I thought were maybe adrenal driven, or I was convinced maybe I had mold exposure. And like, I'm playing whack-a-mole trying to figure out everything that could possibly be going on. And pestering my physician. And my physician was like, look, you're too young. There's no way this is hormones. And you just need to get on with yourself. And I just got angry after a while, wasn't really willing to take that as an explanation. And, I didn't have a great benchmark because my mom had surgical menopause at 32. So I didn't live through it with her. And she didn't really have a bunch of advice because the way they handled that back then was abysmal, take them out and push you out the door. So I just started digging into the information myself and then wanted to be able to help women with more testing and just getting them access to the things that the doctors were kind of withholding, to be perfectly frank. And ultimately, that's when I met Maria and worked through some programming that she was doing. And then we started working together, sort of side by side. And then we were like, you know what, this is a heck of a lot more fun. Why don't we just full on do this together? So that's how we ended up in it. Yeah.
So for me, it was kind of going through menopause or perimenopause, I should say, at around 46, and just had some symptoms. It was kind of like mood issues and sleep issues. Visited a very well-known, well-published doctor on Park Avenue in New York City. He actually put me on hormone replacement therapy right away, was given zero education, was also put on a benzodiazepine to help with sleep, just in case you need it. Became a little bit addicted to that. I managed to thankfully wean myself off before it got like really like dangerously dependent. And then I was like, I kind of knew my body was changing. I didn't know a lot. But then I was like, I just know that there's way more stuff that I need to know. And that's when I just went back to school and educated myself. And that would be nutrition school. And then, you know, many actual real mentorships with physicians, conferences, things like that. So here we
Yeah,
are.
and you guys are like me where, you start out kind of in this nutrition world and then you're kind of
Similar. Yeah.
thrown down into this hormone world. And the more you go down that rabbit hole, the more you go, women know nothing. Like if I'm a
Yeah.
practitioner and I'm in this space already, and I didn't know that this was going to happen to me, and
Right.
then you look around and go, how is anybody else going to know about this? And then you're kind of pulled more and more into it because you're going, women need to know this information and nobody's telling them. Like,
Yeah.
I guess I'll be the person to start sharing this information with the world.
Well, and we talked about it before too, is that, so many women are told, well, you must just be not doing something right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like something must be wrong with your nutrition or your lifestyle or whatever. And that's just wildly unfair to women because there's a lot of us who are putting a lot of effort, daily intentional effort into our choices around nutrition and lifestyle. And we're still suffering from issues related to hormone loss. And so to kind of make women think that it's this easy solution is just, and really unfortunate because there's only so much we can do without our hormones. After a certain point, we need to address the hormone loss.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say you can't hack your way out of hormonal loss. Like this
Well,
is not
Mm-mm.
going to
Kristin,
happen.
just came across someone today, nutritionist, very, very big platform.
Okay.
And she was saying, because someone sent it to us saying, what's your opinion of this? And it was like, here's the issue. Women need to support their adrenal glands so that they don't have the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. And so my response back to the person who sent it was like, she's not wrong, but she's woefully incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it gets back to well, you're not doing something right. You're not
Right.
nourishing the adrenals, or you're not, you're just not doing something right. And therefore that's why you're having symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. Notice I said focus on symptoms, and we
Yeah.
three know it's so much more than just whether you have symptoms or not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you guys talk about in your book that the narrative around menopause is becoming more popular and it's like kind of a buzzword thing nowadays, especially in our world on social media. But some of that narrative is really hurting women. And that's part of it is that, oh, you just have to baby your adrenals and you'll be fine. I've had people say to me, oh, you just need to hang out with girlfriends. That's how
Yeah.
I got through it. I'm like, oh, really? Because that would have stopped the 20 pounds that I gained. Is I just had more friends? Like, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, that's the frustrating thing is the narrative suddenly has become like two different camps. You've either got to choose this like female empowerment and I'm going to recreate myself and be amazing in this next chapter. And then the other one is like, screw the patriarchy. I'm doing it naturally. Don't try and tell me I'm deficient in anything and you're not going to medicalize my situation. It's like, okay, this is incredibly isolating to women. No one wants to have to choose between those two camps, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah.
Because the vast majority of her like, yeah, I'd love the 50s to be my best chapter in life. But hey, if there's something out there that could help me, I'll take that too, and we need to just provide women the bridge between the two things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And hormone replacement therapy, it's really, a lot of doctors that are on board with HRT or even women that are being educated by social media about HRT are having this conversation of, oh, you just need to get rid of the symptoms. And, like, yes, you're going to start to go into perimenopause and menopause, and you're going to lose these hormones, and you're going to get some hot flashes and maybe some vaginal dryness. And we can help you with those, but it's like kind of minimal dose. But what women don't realize is how much our hormones actually act on all the organs in the system, that it isn't just about fertility.
Right.
So I would love for you guys to touch in on some of these things that maybe women have no idea about when it comes to our hormones. And in your book, you guys do such a great job of kind of going through all of the different areas of the body. One that you taught me was about eyes, that we have estrogen receptors in our eyes. And so I was like, oh, wow, no wonder I'm losing my eyesight. I'm
How
losing
about
my
the voice?
estrogen.
How about the voice box? The
Voice
so old
box.
lady voice is low estrogen.
Yeah. Yeah. And, women will get dry eye and then they're thinking, oh my gosh, I have Sjogren's. I've got an autoimmune disease. Something's wrong. And it's like, actually, you just need lubrication. And there's a certain gland in the eye that's dependent upon estrogen. And so if we gave that estrogen back, voila, a lot of times the lubrication issue is solved. Tinnitus is another one. A lot of women don't understand that kind of the balance in the ear and the little hairs in the canal and everything are dependent upon sufficient estrogen. And as we lose that sort of key balance within the ear, and boom, we get this tinnitus. And then women get sent down these rabbit holes, oh, you need this supplement, or you need to change this in your lifestyle, or stop eating this food, or whatever. And it just, it simplifies it down to, overlooking the reality that women from literally head to toe. I mean, you were hearing more about frozen shoulder, right? That's suddenly become, it used to be hot flashes, then bone loss. Okay, those were well accepted. But now this frozen shoulders, like, did you know? And Maria and I are like, welcome to the universe. Like, yes, all the joints, all of our
All the
synovial
joints.
fluid, all of our ligaments and tendons, for women to realize that beyond our boobs and our lady bits, we've got estrogen receptors head to toe. So it's not just about having our breasts go flat and our, Netherlands dry up. This is about our lipid balance. This is about, our ability to clear tau proteins in our brain. This is about maintaining the vascular, strength and health of our endothelium. Like, there's so much more to it. But that doesn't sell products, to be perfectly honest, because the only thing that can fix those things is estrogen. But we can't just put estrogen in a supplement bottle and sell it with the brand. And that's unfortunately part of why the conversation is just so misguided right now.
Yeah, even the hair, you guys were saying in the book, like that your hair it won't die as quickly. I think it was because of the estrogen.
It changes the cycle. Yeah, the
Yeah.
cycle of the hair.
So it like sticks around longer before it kind of has that regrowth
But it's not healthier, right? It gets drier and brittler, and the shaft becomes
from the loss.
thinner
Yeah.
and more prone to breakage. And, so women are like, what happened? I had these great locks, and they're shoving collagen down their throats like there's no tomorrow, expecting some solution. And it might move the needle a little. That's great. You take your biotin and collagen and hyaluronic acid. But at the end of the day, you have other things beyond aesthetics that might be a little bit more important that you should be considering, that the estrogen would help.
Yeah. And there's a lot of women that will say, well, I don't have any symptoms. So why should I? I
Yeah.
just had a woman interview me the other day, actually, who's carnivore. And she said, I've been in menopause for, I think she said 8 years or something. And she said,
Okay, she means she's
I,
postmenopausal.
yeah, postmenopausal. And she's like, I've never had any symptoms. And I
Well,
was like,
we speak about that. We speak about that. There are some people that seem to have this kind of halo effect or of estrogen, maybe, or maybe they do have some good adrenal production and, kind of transference from estrone to estradiol. Maybe their lifestyle habits are stellar. And they've been able to tamp down on obvious symptoms. But I would say out of everything, that one thing breaks my heart. Because let's just I mean, I don't know if you know how old she was, but let's just assume she's 52 and she kind of went through menopause, and then she's been postmenopausal from 52 to say maybe 6 or 8 years, right? So now she's pushing towards 60. Karen, once they pass over 60, you get about 62, 63 or so. Seemingly, most of the women that we've spoken to, that's when the bottom falls out. But I was doing so good. I was doing so good. I was able to maintain my weight, or maybe they are still maintaining like a healthy weight.
But they just broke a bone.
They broke a
mm-hmm.
bone. Or why do I have heart palpitations? Why does my doctor want to put me on a statin? Um, why am I wildly osteopenic, like borderline osteoporosis? And now the doctor wants to put me on bisphosphonates. And, they don't know. It breaks my heart. I spoke to a woman at my church the other day, gorgeous woman. She's, Mexican, emigrated here, years ago. And she's just gorgeous, right? She CrossFits, she's 48. She's like, I gave her a copy of the book and she's like, I haven't read it yet. And she goes, I'm through menopause. And I said, how old are you? She goes, I'm 48. She goes, and I think I'm good. Like, I feel pretty good. Like, I took her hands and I said, please read the book.
Yeah.
Not about absence of symptoms. So you're going to have this 48-year-old who's got 12 years from now is going to be like, I should have read that book. If she doesn't, that is, because she's like just banking on feeling good. And we all want to feel good, and we should. And that is a big part of aging well, but it's not the only part. And it's where we trip up so badly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost it's a not a good thing almost that people don't, if
Right.
they don't get symptoms, right? It's
No,
like,
true.
oh, I
Or
wish you did get symptoms, because then you'd be more into figuring out,
Attentive.
what to do
yeah,
about it.
yeah. But it's not uncommon for women to have hot flashes that go away. And that's the other thing, is like they have hot flashes, they white knuckle it through, or maybe they're not that horrible, but whichever, they disappear. And then they think, well, my hot flashes are gone, I'm fine. And I'm like, well, nobody feels plaque accumulation, right? Nobody feels the bones doing their thing. Nobody, unless you're checking it constantly, women get surprised. They're like, my blood pressure's been creeping up. We're like, and getting them to understand that like the stiffness of the arteries starts to change. And this is why we started suddenly have blood pressure changes. And so those sorts of things, because they can happen in this creeping, slow fashion, and they only get noticed when they get checked, women start to think, well, I'm just aging. And we're like, no, you're actually losing your health span. That's, we're all aging with every birthday. Everyone's aging, but these changes should not be inevitable. So if we could maybe address why these things are happening beyond just the fact that you had another birthday, then, maybe women would kind of pay attention better.
Yeah, I interviewed this fascinating woman, and she was talking about this study. I don't think it was a great study when I looked it up, but it was still, it sounded great. But it was basically that when they tested chronological and biological age of a menopausal woman, that within months of going into menopause, like post-menopause, she would age up to 9 years within months of losing all the hormones, basically, and hitting menopause. So
Yeah.
that just goes to show, though, like, look at how much this can age you. And everyone's trying so hard to stop aging or biohack their age, and they're doing all of the things. And then they're like, oh, no HRT. And
No
it's like,
HRT.
God, what are you going to say that when your heart starts to fail and the doctor wants to put you on some medication?
Yeah.
No, this is natural aging. No, I don't think you will.
No, yeah, that's the natural, I want to age naturally thing. I mean, Maria and I say aging is a privilege. We should all be thrilled to be hitting our 50s and 60s and still be upright.
Yeah.
But, health span is not guaranteed. So that's the piece that we want to kind of focus people on, is like, let's decouple the aging. And when they say, I want to do it naturally, we're like, that's great. But, in 1900, the average life expectancy was about 30 years less than it is now. So you just died around the age of menopause, and now we're outliving it, but we're not living it very well. So maybe we want to focus on the fact that it's not just the aging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Now, when it comes to hormone replacement therapy, there's many different ways that you could go on hormone replacement therapy: dosages, delivery forms. There's a lot of controversy. And as you guys know, I just did a great little estrogen roundtable with some pretty big doctors about, the bias versus estradiol only, which I will link to that one in the show notes, because it's a really good one that I think everybody should listen to. It's very educational. But I would love to hear your guys' stance, because it is unique and we don't talk about it a lot. It's not out there a lot in mainstream media. And that is physiologic restoration of hormones and cycling of hormones, and using estradiol, not a bias. And we're going to ask you why, of course. But first, let's start. What is physiologic restoration of hormones?
It is the getting your hormones to the level of a healthy younger woman. So a woman in, say, her 20s and maybe early to mid 30s. So that's physiologic restoration. And it also does involve cyclical progesterone, because so the way hormones are dosed now is for convenience. And I say, convenience of the practitioner who's managing the patient, and convenience of the woman as well. But, the way the hormones are dosed now is everyday progesterone and everyday estradiol, which there should be some estrogen in the body on a daily basis, but we never had progesterone in the body, not in any meaningful amounts on, say, days 1 through 14. So that's just, just to kind of keep everything quiet and calm. Whether or
Well,
not
and there's physiologic levels, which, as Maria said, is the levels premenopausal, but then there's the regimen, the exposure of the body to those levels fluctuated. If we look at a basic menstruation chart and we look at the release of estrogen and progesterone, it has a very distinct rhythm and dance. And so if we're talking about true physiologic restoration, we're not just mimicking the levels, we're mimicking the presentation at the certain particular times within that cycle. So what women don't understand is when we talk about static dosing, that's just the same dose every single day. With physiologic restoration, if we're going to mimic that natural cycle, and we're not doing it for fertility, we're not doing it for pretending that we're 30 again, we're doing it because this rhythm, this dance between the hormones, is specifically tuned to certain genomic signals within the body. Okay, so something like angiotensin, okay, creating new blood vessels and protecting our vascular walls. That's dependent upon a peak of estrogen that then declines and is followed by a peak of progesterone. And so it's not just presenting the hormones to the body in a certain fashion that's estradiol every day and progesterone for 2 weeks out of the month. It's actually presenting them that mimics that rhythm so that we have this climbing peak of estrogen. It starts to taper, hands off to progesterone, which peaks, etc. And that's true physiologic restoration. So it's the levels plus the exposure timed according to a typical cycle.
Yeah. And so it's kind of the Mother Nature is doing this cyclical dance for a reason. It's all for purpose. It's not
That has
just
nothing to do with fertility.
exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. And so let's talk about some of those peaks and troughs and why they're happening. One is that on day 12, we have a spike of estrogen, and which then there's a testosterone spike shortly
Day
afterwards.
15. Yeah, day 15.
Day
Mm-hmm.
15. Why does that happen?
Well, I mean, we're preparing the body obviously for potential fertility and implantation of an egg, and we need libido to make us desirous, and we're have a follicle that's being prepared and an egg that's being selected. And so with respect to fertility, that's why you have that handoff with the estrogen and testosterone. But even if we're looking at the peaks of estrogen and progesterone, we have something like the body needs receptors in order to utilize any hormone that we send it. Progesterone receptors are dependent upon that peak of estradiol. So this is where women a lot of times go kind of off the rails when it comes to a poor HRT regimen. They might be taking progesterone every single day or only taking progesterone in a perimenopausal body that has declining estrogen at the same time. And so they're losing some receptor availability to that progesterone. And ultimately are like, what happened? My progesterone's not working any longer. We're like, well, because you're actually not creating receptors to receive the progesterone. So that those two peaks are one thing. Now we have like P53 tumor suppressor. That's a huge piece of cancer protection, and how the day 12 peak and the day 21 peak respectively affect our P53 expression. That's relevant. We can look at apoptosis. The body does not want to just keep growing, right? We need to kind of grow and shed cells and grow and shed shells. And so we need to have this kind of suicide feature to our cells that is dependent upon our day 12 peak and our day 21 peak. So all of these sort of actions within the body that we're very much not aware of, right? And if we realize them all, we'd be like, wow, my body's pretty amazing in the way it's doing all this. And in the female body, all of that is being regulated by this beautiful rhythmic dance between estrogen and progesterone primarily.
Mm-hmm. So is there research that shows that static dosing of estrogen, we don't get that upregulation of P53?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you can look at static dosing because usually static dosing is done in low amounts, right? So that's the other thing is we're not talking about physiologic levels. And there are studies showing that bone loss does not get recaptured with bone building when we are giving this constant stream of low dose estrogen. So that piece of it is relevant for many things, right? Is that we need to have these signals. They require a high enough spike, a high enough peak They require tapers. They require this handoff. And so static dosing is not going to do that. You're not going to get the same apoptosis. You're not going to get the same cardiovascular protection. You're not going to get the same, I believe it's Maria, the progesterone peak is relevant to tau protein clearance in the brain. So you're not going to get that same stuff if you're just sitting here taking the same amount every single day.
Got it. Yeah. And I think that that's really important for people to hear. And it's not to say, everyone, that you're not going to benefit from static dosing of HRT. Majority of women are on static dosing.
Correct. Yeah. And they'll feel
well,
better.
Yeah.
Yeah. They might not have their hot flashes. Maybe they have a little bit more vaginal lubrication, etc. But there are just things that are not going to function optimally when we just provide that same amount. So we don't want to kind of exclude women who've chosen that. That's perfectly fine. You can choose it. We just want everyone to be informed on what the HRT regimen that you choose is and is not capable of providing you when it comes to a health picture. That's all, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that there is this option that I don't think many know that that's even out there, that it's, and it's originated, I would say, from the Wiley protocol. She was kind of the first person kind of put that on the scene. Suzanne Summers was really into that. And so she kind of brought awareness to it as well.
Yeah.
Which is different than physiologic restoration, but the same idea of, hey, let's cycle these hormones and try to mimic Mother Nature as best we can.
Yeah. And there's plenty of doctors out there, someone who will probably repost this podcast and be like, this is quackery and et cetera, et cetera. And Maria's favorite saying is that usually doctors are not up or not, they're down on things that they're not up on. Right. And so this really is just a place of, they've learned what they've learned. They're not going to stray outside of the boundaries of what they've learned. And to be perfectly frank, because we know some of these physicians, they've come after us, we'll just call them flat out lazy. They don't want to manage a woman's cycle. And if a woman still has a uterus and we only present progesterone every 2 weeks, she's going to have a withdrawal bleed. It's not a bleed that's relevant to fertility, but we want to build the uterus up and then we want to shed it. That's healthy, right? And we accepted that as healthy back when we were in our 20s and 30s. If we didn't have a cycle in our 20s and 30s, alarm bells went off. There was concern. And even if a woman said, I have no interest in bearing children, there still is concern if you do not have a cycle in your 20s and 30s. Why? Because they immediately worry about bone health. They immediately worry about heart health. They immediately worry about cognitive changes. So why was it relevant in our 20s and 30s? But now when a woman is menopausal in her 50s or postmenopausal, these doctors are like, you don't need to bleed. It's not relevant. And, we're going to cry BS on that every single time because these doctors are just, they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with helping a woman kind of get things regulated and whatnot. And, is it constantly a game of whack-a-mole with a menstrual bleed? It doesn't have to be. In fact, we say the cycle is a vital sign. And if something is too heavy or too light or comes late or comes early, that's a sign something needs tweaking. And a good provider is going to dive into the trenches with you and figure out how to tweak it and get it correct. The providers who say you don't need it, it's because they don't want to invest in you.
And they've already decided for you.
Yeah.
That you don't want to have a period, which I think is wrong. Women need to be presented with this option.
Yeah. And it's for anyone listening who's thinking, look, Kristin and Maria, I don't want to have a period either. Like we hear you, like I had horrific cycles when I was younger. It's not that. That's the beauty of physiologic restoration is it's a bit of an artificial construct. The dosing for you individually is done in such a way as to make sure that this is a very moderate bleed, 3 days, maybe 5 max. It's predictable, it's scheduled. It's kind of a, monthly reminder of how things are going. So you get to understand daily how, is this working? How are these things happening? And, the doctors who don't want to deal with it, like Maria said, they've made that decision for you. And it's just incredibly unfortunate. It's yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. It's not this heavy bleed with all these cramps and horrible PMS. Typically, you hear back from women on physiologic restoration and they'll tell you, oh no, I don't get PMS. My period is super light. It's a couple of days of light bleeding and then it's gone. And that really does show, oh, okay, your levels are at a good level that you're going to be getting that protection from that we're wanting going into our later half of our life.
Yeah. And to be honest, what a lot of doctors aren't going to tell women is that if you choose to do static dosing and progesterone all the time, meaning you're not cycling your progesterone, there's a large percentage of women for whom they will have breakthrough bleeding. And, we've had plenty of clients who said, look, you guys, I hear you. I agree. I think the cycle sounds great, but it's just not for me. And we're not judging. We just want women to understand, you know, what their choices are. And so great. So they'll start with regular daily estrogen and daily progesterone. And then they come back to us about anywhere from 6 to 15 months later,
yeah.
Maria. And they're like,
Yeah.
And
6
I
months
can't
to a
handle
year.
this. I'm bleeding constantly. I
Yeah.
can't go on vacation because I never know when it's coming. And we're like, that's the beauty of planning it. You can schedule this thing. Your body used to have a schedule. Maybe we want to follow that schedule.
And then that kind of out of rhythm and that spotting, that bleeding, it leads the doctor to be like, oh my gosh, you're not supposed to be bleeding. And so then it leads to, usually a transvaginal ultrasound, which is appropriate if there is bleeding.
Or
right?
a DNC.
Right. And then what do? They take you from, say, the 0.75 patch or what, a mid dose.
0.075.
And they put you down to an even lower dose.
Yes.
So that you're going to get almost no buildup of that uterine lining. But you know what? You may not be getting repair in the blood vessels at the same time. You're just, so, I just think that's unfortunate. They may go down to like a really, really low dose as a result.
Yeah.
Like yeah, because they assume that it's from too much estrogen causing all the bleeding, which it can be. But
it can be, sure.
You guys point out that progesterone every day and a lot of it can cause an unstable uterine lining.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I thought that was like when I heard you guys talk about that was a long time ago. And it was a big aha moment for me because I was like, yeah, you know what? There's some women where it's like you can sit there and move up and down this estrogen and it's, doesn't do it. They're still breakthrough bleeding. They have nothing, no fibroids, nothing. And then it's like, oh, it's the progesterone. And even the progesterone too, I see sometimes causing what everyone thinks is estrogen, which it typically is the breast tissue, the sore breast, the inflamed breast, water retention. Because everyone's like, oh no, progesterone helps with water retention. I'm like, whoa.
But
it can
again,
also
this goes
give you water retention.
And it goes to those receptors, right? If you're a woman who's on a 0.025 patch and you're given 200 milligrams of prometrium every single day, guess what? You don't have enough receptors to take in that much progesterone. And ultimately you can get the, cankles and, breasts and all these sort of things. And that's the other beauty of that cycle. Like breast tissue is kind of a living, breathing, constantly exchanging thing, just like our bones. And over the course of a 28-day cycle, when we were not menopausal, we had this sort of proliferation of breast tissue and then this apoptosis and restoration of breast tissue. That's how we keep healthy breasts. And, we get a lot of women who will say, well, show me studies on this. And the sad thing is that the vast majority of studies were used with progestins. They were used with synthetic forms of progesterone. And so it's very difficult to extrapolate the results. But there is a beautiful study out there. It's called the Danish study. And they looked at using actual progesterone and they compared continuous to cyclic use. And guess who had fewer heart events? Guess who had better vascular health? Guess who had just overall better cardiovascular disease protection? The cyclic progesterone users. And so that's, we need more studies like that. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of incentive to do that, to be perfectly frank. So.
Yeah. And it's the same with estrogen. A lot of the studies have been done on Premarin.
Right. Right. I mean, we're getting more and more, but what's happening is they're using very low dose patches. This most recent study that was looking at, all the women over 65 years old and saying it is safe to have HRT later than those ages and whatnot. It was like, that's great. But a lot of these women are being used very poor HRT regimens. Can we imagine how compelling the data would be if we had better regimens that they were on? Right. And so, we do have a study coming up. Maria and I work with an organization that's got the NIH grant going right now to essentially take that standard of care of a patch and prometrium all the time and compare it to physiologic restoration. And we're going to look at hippocampal volume in the brain, because people don't realize that women's brains literally shrink without estrogen, right? So looking at hippocampal volume, looking at the bone DEXA before and after, looking at CAC scores before and after, all of those things. And, we know it because there's been 30 plus years of clinical evidence, but it's time to put this to a study and say the conventional approach is just flat out not helping women.
I think I offered to be part of that study years ago. Like I signed
Yeah.
up for it or something. That was through the Women's Network,
Women's Hormone
right?
Network.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 I was like, yeah, I'll take part of that, but I never heard from anybody. So
Yeah. Well, it's gone through some
still,
iterations, and we just had the
yeah,
NIH grant in June. So yeah, it's coming.
that's amazing. I'm so glad that that's going to be done because there
Yeah.
isn't much, right? And so it's always so hard to convince somebody or not convince somebody, but when you're trying to say like, hey, you may want to cycle your hormones, and they're like, well, where's the research? And it's like, well, there's not a ton,
Right.
but so
But
it'll
do
be
we
nice
need
to
a lot of
see.
research? I mean, this is the silly thing, right? It's like,
Right? It's
ladies,
like,
we didn't cycle it before. Why is not cycling it now? Or we did cycle it before. Why is not cycling it okay when we're older? If we know the genomic signals are dependent upon 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off of progesterone, why would we not give women the restoration of those signals in that fashion? It just doesn't make any sense.
no. And some women, they say they're very dependent on the progesterone for sleep.
Yeah, that's a common
That's usually the number
excuse.
one thing you'll hear is like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't, I won't sleep. So
Yeah.
what do you guys see with that? Do you see that actually when estrogen can get high enough that we typically will find that sleep,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, the progesterone's not giving them that much sleep benefit. It helps with sleep onset,
Onset.
but our deep sleep, our, quality sleep, our sleep architecture is all estrogen driven. So when these women say, I can't go off it, I can't go off it, I'm like, no, maybe you need to get off the 0.025 patch and go to something else. And Maria and I mean, I love my peak days of estrogen because I'm like, I am going to sleep like a dead person tonight. It's the best
Right?
day ever. So, yeah.
I sleep great on my estrogen, half of my
Yeah.
cycle, no problem. I
Yeah.
heard a woman yesterday the other day say, "Oh, my nurse practitioner just upped my oral progesterone to 600 milligrams a night every day because it wasn't helping me sleep." And I'm like,
I
"No,
do not
that's
want to
not
be her
the answer."
anymore.
She's going to be punch drunk in the
I said,
morning. I
I
mean,
was going
that's
to say, you
sad.
must feel like crap. You must be a zombie right now.
God
Oh,
forbid you get like a 3 a.m. phone call with an emergency because there's no functioning happening.
I would just be crying. Like if ever I've had too much oral, I'd just cry and cry and cry. Like there's no way I could handle that.
we just get cranky.
Yeah.
I just cry. Oh, yeah, no. Okay, so when it comes to estradiol use, because that's what's used in physiologic restoration, there is no biased ever
Correct.
used from what I know of
Right.
in Wiley
Correct.
or physiologic restoration. And there's reason for that. Once again, Mother Nature, let's look at what's happening in our fertile years when we are not pregnant. And I had this big discussion on my podcast about it. And, there's a lot of practitioners are in the camp that we should be using estriol in combination with estradiol. What are your thoughts on that?
Why? The body will make the estriol that you need. That's because estradiol can convert one way into estriol. So why would we need that? And plus estriol is really going to push on that beta receptor, which and estradiol is going to push equally on both the growth receptor and the brake receptor.
Yeah.
And it's really estradiol that all of the studies, almost all of them that we have on estrogen have been done on anyway. So it just doesn't really seem to make any sense. Okay. But then having said that, so our clinical experiences, women don't get relief.
Mm-mm.
Do not get relief. We test them and they have estradiol levels of, for women using bias of 15 or even worse,
5.
5.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't make any sense. Particularly because you will make the estriol that you need with estradiol. So
And they're lovely, well-meaning individuals. We know them, and trained under one of them. We've had mentorships with a couple of them. Like we get it. But one, the study that they usually cite is very old. It was based off of like a handful of women, I think like 9. And we're talking about pregnancy, urine metabolites. And this is the basis for the whole argument. And I think, whether they're willing to admit it or not, it feels to us as though, because we've tried to hear their side, and we've tried to look at the research, and we've tried to understand why one would choose estriol. And the only thing we really keep coming back to is there's still, again, whether they like to admit it or not, there's still an inherent fear of estradiol and this whole cancer question. And, that's, we get it. If a woman, is within active cancer treatment or recently had cancer and she is just scared, we would say that's probably a bit misplaced, but okay, fine. Let's give her some estriol if that's how she feels a little bit better. But at the end of the day, a healthy, perimenopausal, postmenopausal woman is going to benefit from estradiol, not from estriol. And the only reason to give her biased or a high dose of estriol is because of there's this underlying fear. And it's just very sad that continues, because these are educated individuals and they know better. There is, more evidence to show that estradiol prevents, has a protective effect on breasts. It improves mortality outcomes for women who do have breast cancer. You have less chance of recurrence if you are on estrogen therapy using estradiol and you have breast cancer. Like, the odds are stacked so heavily in favor of estradiol, even on the cancer question, that it just doesn't pass the smell test to claim that estriol is the hormone that should be used.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that study that they constantly quote, it says that the sum of estrone and estradiol together is less than the sum of estriol. And so I was like, I've looked at thousands of labs to this point, both metabolite testing and serum testing. I think I can count on one hand how many times I've seen a woman not on HRT that has higher estriol than she does estradiol and estrone.
And usually that's a genetic SNP.
Yeah.
So, again, very rare is the case. And the studies, these women were pregnant. Of course, they're going to have high levels of estriol.
Yeah.
That's just
But
the way
that would also kind of just dictate that volume equals importance, and that's not necessarily true. We know we have more volume of testosterone, right? But estradiol is our primary female hormone. So I don't really think that volume holds, much to the argument here.
Yeah, and when there's too much estriol, ladies, is it going to like kick off the estradiol?
We think so. We think it down, it's receptor competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's why you'll see,
We've seen it.
I see people that have come to me that their doctor just kept putting them on higher and higher bias because the estradiol wasn't high enough and they're still having symptoms. So these women were on, 8-10 milligrams of estriol and, this little baby amount of estradiol and still suffering immensely. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot of estriol. And I think it can actually cause weight gain, which I've only been able to find one study that kind of showed that it was diabogenic. I always can't say that word, but basically can help induce type 2 diabetes. Diabogenic. Yeah. But it was in mice, but it showed that the ones that were on heavy doses of estriol started to get insulin resistance.
But this makes sense. A pregnant woman is inherently insulin resistant.
Yes.
And that's a good thing during pregnancy. It's not a good thing when we're not pregnant, right? And so that makes no sense to use that in a woman who's not, in pregnancy and is looking to restore her health. And the sad thing is a lot of these times women won't find out that their bias isn't working for them until they've already got now a diagnosis of something else. And that is where, we just kind of want to keep this conversation happening so that women think twice. If your provider is offering you only biased, they likely are scared of estradiol. They don't want to invest in a full, complete HRT regimen for you. And, they're not really that concerned about your long-term health.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what about progesterone? Because there's a lot of practitioners in social media and out there in the world that refuse to give a woman topical progesterone. and it's all oral, oral, oral. And we're seeing a growing number of women that have sensitivities to oral progesterone. I
Right.
don't know if you guys see it, but I do all the time. And maybe that's just because I'm one of the few people that actually talk about it. But there is this neurosteroid sensitivity that can happen with oral progesterone. I
Yeah.
have it myself. If I have too much, I'm gonzo. I'm depressed. Like I said before, I cry nonstop. And so topical is great. And topical is all we use for a very long time before oral even came on the scene. What about you guys in your, you've spoken with so many women, you've coached so many women with their HRT. Are you seeing this like increased risk of uterine cancer because of them using progesterone cream over oral?
No,
No, but
not at
also a
all.
lot of the women that we work with are shedding every month, which is protective as well. So
Yeah. But I would say too that, silly Karen, cream compounded progesterone is not patentable, right?
Yeah.
So we do have a reason why a lot of these new voices, self-proclaimed experts, suddenly, because they have an MD after their name, in the social media sphere, are down on oral or on topical progesterone. Is, they're also very squarely in the framework of NAMS and conventional medicine, which means FDA approved. And FDA approved means primarily prometrium or, some form of generic progesterone in a capsule. So, not to get conspiratorial, but I think we need to be honest about why there is kind of a motivation to be down on certain forms of hormones with their only available compounded.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
it's hard to test it in serum, which is the gold standard for
For
testing.
both, I mean, to be honest, whether it's, oral or topical, progesterone is just notoriously difficult to test in blood serum. But, even that being said, there are studies out there comparing transdermal progesterone and endometrial protection against oral progesterone. They're even. So why we continue to kind of demonize one versus the other, I think is ridiculous. As long as a woman is on a bioidentical form of progesterone, let her choose what works best for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. Yeah. And I just think we have to stop scaring women because they might not have that choice to take
Correct.
oral
Right.
because they're sensitive to it, and
Right.
the prometrium, as you guys pointed out in your book, is full of some pretty, I just knew of the peanut oil, and then you're like, and yellow number, which you have all these other like strange ingredients in it that I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
naturally, that's not what our body does. So if once again we go back to Mother Nature, it's not what it's not going through the first hepatic pass of the liver and the gut. And I always say it's almost like you're taking two different medications when you take oral, which is there can both be great, but
Right.
it's like two different medications. Okay, so we're wrapping up here, ladies. You're going to have to come back on because, I just love picking your brain. I always like to learn in my podcast interviews, so I'm learning a lot, and so I'll have to have you guys come back.
We
So
love it.
where can everybody find you? You guys have a great course for practitioners, so I highly recommend if you are looking to take a practitioner's course, you guys offer it to licensed medical professionals as well as the
yeah.
layperson, correct?
Health coaches. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Health coaches,
Yep.
yeah.
Health coaches,
Yeah.
nutritionists. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that we've got information about that on our site, wiseandwell.me. And then we obviously have our client program. That's kind of been our, gold standard of really educating women and telling them the things that they're not hearing in their doctor's office, and then just giving them the empowerment to make the decision on their own. And, we'll match them with providers if that's what they choose, or help them with the talking points for a provider that they already have and love. And all of that's on our website. And then, like you already kind of pointed out with Instagram, Maria does a phenomenal job of really kind of putting out good content that, helps women. But at the end of the day, hopefully not everyone's just taking their bits off of social media and they're actually getting a deep dive education somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. And your book can be found on Amazon, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores. It's coming out September 10th, and UK and English speaking languages not in the continental US will be September 12th.
And it's just, once again, such a great book. It should be one of these books that I feel like it should be mandatory for every woman to read. Should just be handed out in high school. Hey, like here,
Hey.
everybody just learn this. I got a teenage daughter and I've been trying to teach her about menopause because I'm like, we have to start teaching this at a young age. Like, this is what to expect, because they don't get taught anything. They get taught all
No.
about what's happening to their body now, but what about like, where else are they going to get it from?
Yeah.
So yeah, it should just be mandatory. So maybe we can make that happen, ladies.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate both of you and all of the work that you've done for women in this space.
Thank you for
Thank
having us,
you
Lauren.
so much.